Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the NHPCO virtual town hall on Medicare Advantage and Hospice. So my name is Catherine Kemp. I am the Veteran Services Manager here at NHPCO. I'm just going to quickly kick things off with a couple of housekeeping tips. All right, many of you are familiar with Zoom. Just want to give everyone a friendly reminder. We will be incorporating poll questions throughout this town hall. One of the focuses of this meeting is to really get feedback from you. We want to hear from you. We want your stories. We want your feedback. We want your questions. So please keep those coming in. So we will have poll questions. We also have a chat function on your Zoom webinar box. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you will see a little chat icon to click. Using that, you can either chat with your fellow attendees or you can send a direct message to us, the panelists. You are also welcome to use the Q&A function. So again, if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you can enter questions through that function as well. All right, so to get going, we just want to do a little test run of the poll questions, make sure everything is working correctly. Okay, so you should see a poll pop up on your screen. It is very important that NHPCO receives feedback on your favorite pie. Please go ahead and answer. We'll just give everyone a couple more seconds to get that filled in. Okay, looks like the consensus is Apple. Good to know. Also glad that many of you are, again, familiar with Zoom and able to use that polling function. Again, we will be using it throughout the town hall. Okay, so going forward, another just couple housekeeping things. This is being recorded, just so all of you are aware. This is being recorded and these slides will also be made available. We have a MA-related member resources page on NHPCO's website. We have everything from a one-pager on background, just general information. And again, the webinar recording as well as the slides will be posted there for member access whenever you'd like to see them. Again, we also want to hear from you. If you have any questions, anything related to this topic, we want to hear from you. Please email us innovation@nhpco.org. Again, we would love to hear from you. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Zinnia Harrison.
Thank you, Catherine. So I believe we have over 400 people registered for today. It looks like we have right over 200 that have logged in. So I do appreciate everyone calling in and joining us. If you haven't already done so, please click on the link in the appointment to participate via Zoom. Again, it's really important that we get your answers to the polling questions and you have an opportunity to submit your thoughts via the chat box. There will be questions specifically designed for that. So Catherine, for those that don't want to be shown and want to remain anonymous, is there a way for them to turn off their webcam?
I am so glad you asked that, Zinnia. All participants that have registered and are online right now, you are automatically muted and your video should automatically be turned off. You also have the option when you post questions to remain anonymous if you'd like. Again, we just want your feedback and questions, so we're perfectly fine with that. Feel free to post however you like.
Great, thank you. So just for quick background, in August, NHPCO announced our partnership with the Better Medicare Alliance to engage in a mutual collaboration, and really to identify these three things, where there's information gaps, areas where we have agreement, and potential policy questions that could be raised for further discussion. Again, your participation today will really help us establish how to move forward with those conversations and collaboration with plans, hospices, and other stakeholders. So on the virtual town hall today, you may hear from those listed on the slide. Ido, myself, Lori Bishop, which I think many people have heard from, whether it's a webinar or a podcast, and Catherine, who just introduced us this morning, or afternoon, depending where you are. Before we begin, I'd like to ask Ido, our president and CEO, about the NHPCO podcast that was posted on Tuesday. So Ido, you had a conversation with Congresswoman Allison Schwartz, the CEO of the Better Medicare Alliance. For those that haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast, I'd love to hear your key takeaways from that conversation.
I'm happy to provide them. Thank you, Zinnia. The podcast was a very good opportunity to chat with someone we don't normally sit down with and chat with, and that is the managed care industry. Allison Schwartz, as some of you know, heads up the Better Medicare Alliance, which is a group of some of the largest Medicare Advantage plans. And what we discussed, well moderated by Lori, was really going into a discussion here with an open mind and without any preconceived notions about how the conversation might go, but with a couple of clear guardrails in place. Clearly, we are doing what's best for hospice providers and for Medicare beneficiaries, the patients and families, really in reverse order. Our top concern is doing something that is best for people with Medicare, and the other guardrail is obviously filling in some of the details that we really don't have when everybody talks about Medicare Advantage carve-in or anything else. Some of the basic questions that you all might have that we'll discuss today. What is the payment? What are the protections to make sure that there isn't too much or really too little care provided? A lot of that isn't known. A lot of the data to inform that isn't known or hasn't been studied. So despite the fact that there have been some pronunciations by Senate Finance or by MedPAC about their positions, there's still a lot that isn't known about this. And I think what we really agreed on is that this is the beginning of a conversation about filling in some of those details that will take some time. And the other thing I want everyone to understand is that this is as much as this is an academic move, this is a strategic move. We have been, and Medicare Advantage plans have been criticized for not having a dialogue about this. And I think part of the reason why government sometimes makes policy change without involving the people that are impacted is because that dialogue doesn't take place. And what's really important to do is to lead and inform that change so that we get what we want and we blunt the change that we don't want. And so it's going to be really important to come in with an open mind and with those guardrails in place, keep the well-being of patients and families in our minds, and think about the ultimate goal here. And the ultimate goal is not to have MA carve-in or not have MA carve-in, but really to make sure that hospices and community-based palliative care programs continue to provide the important service that we provide, not just to the people that we provide them to now, and not for the time period that we provide it for now, but for a longer period of time and for more people. If this is an opportunity that will allow for that and increase quality, it's something that we want to talk about. If it's not, it's something that we want to fight. And this will be the part of the dialogue with ourselves here, with managed care plans there, and with the government in the room that will be really helpful in creating our own destiny. I want everyone to understand Medicare Advantage plans are as leery about this conversation, really as leery about Medicare Advantage carve-in as providers are. But they also recognize that dialogue is important and that it is much better to create our destiny than to have it handed to us by government. So there we are. And I'm really looking forward to this dialogue, to your questions, and to the conversation that we're going to have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ido. It's really great to hear that the partnership with the Better Medicare Alliance, and actually the purpose of this virtual town hall today, is really about collaboration and getting feedback and starting this conversation and being the leaders of that. I'd also like to recognize that our audience today brings forth a wide range of knowledge on Medicare Advantage and hospice. So whether you're new to the topic or you've been tracking this very closely since 2014, this is that opportunity for all of our members, regardless of your experience or thoughts about this, to share your perspective. You are an expert in the field, and it's great to, just get your feedback. It's not whether you're a large hospice or small hospice. Really, this topic is a hospice community issue where all our voices can contribute to that dialogue. What we gather from your feedback will help shape that convening that Ida was talking about with the Better Medicare Alliance and some key stakeholders. So for the convening, we do expect to have some federal speakers. So in the conversation today, we may ask you something specific about, questions you might want to ask those federal speakers when thinking about Medicare Advantage and hospice. We'll also be meeting with the diverse stakeholders, not just plans and hospices, but also people that represent caregivers, people from an academic environment, health economists, to help us understand the issue. And I want to emphasize that this isn't the only conversation we will have, but it is a start. So I want to recognize that the boards, the NHPCO boards, the committees, the councils, they've all offered so many thoughts on this issue that help us all realize, we can't ignore this in this changing healthcare environment. So it is really important. So for our objectives today is just to give a very brief overview about the current state of Medicare Advantage and hospice, how it works. Many of you probably already know this, what policymakers are saying, and then we'll dive into what our NHPCO members are saying about this issue. So as many of you know, Medicare Advantage plans do not cover hospice. It's not part of the benefit package. And in order for a beneficiary to elect hospice, they first must disenroll from MA and then choose a Medicare certified hospice provider to receive hospice services. Oftentimes people ask, well, what's actually covered? Who's covering what? For hospice, that beneficiary would receive all services related to the terminal condition. So on the hospice side, you would provide your services as you would normally. On the Medicare Advantage side, for them, there's a shift. So the shift is that it really only covers any additional services not covered under fee-for-service, things like dental and vision under the plan, and sometimes some Part D drugs. So for our first question, we're going to ask, do you serve beneficiaries with prior Medicare Advantage enrollment? So as Catherine's pulling up the question, we will be able to find out how many of you do serve or don't, or you're not sure. And for those who are using the chat box, please let us know, what is your view of Medicare Advantage while we wait for the results to come together. Okay. Lori, are there any comments in the chat box about what their views are about Medicare Advantage?
I think they were so busy voting.
Okay. We'll get you on the chat box later. Okay, I think we can,
There is one chat statement here from Linda Navarro, and it's very hard to obtain a patient's Medicare number when they are on an MA plan.
oh, that's really interesting. Thank you, Linda. So it looks like a majority do serve beneficiaries with MA prior to their hospice election. Okay, so oftentimes people want to know, well, what's the goal of Medicare Advantage? In MedPAC report in 2014, they highlighted a few goals that are trying to articulate why it may make sense to carve in hospice into Medicare Advantage. And ultimately, they're focusing on the fragmented payment arrangements and fee-for-service. It does not provide this integrated, coordinated benefit package. And MA is expected to be financially responsible and accountable for their enrollees. So it would seem that in order to do that and have an integrated, coordinated benefit, they would want to cover the full continuum of care, which would include hospice. So for a chat box question, we'll take a pause here. Medicare Advantage operates a bit differently because it's a federal program. Many of you have relationships with and experience with state managed care. So I've heard many concerns and experiences from members about their managed care experience with the state. I'd love to hear your experience, positive or negative, with state managed care plans. And please also don't forget to identify your state, because that would be helpful.
While people are doing that, and just to share a few things that are coming through the chat, it does seem like a common theme here is confusion that MA plans have about what's covered and not covered and by whom when a patient elects hospice services. And then some members just not realizing that that complicates things for the plan and for the member.
Okay, thank you, Lori. So in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about MedPAC, the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission. They made a recommendation in 2014. So just as a quick overview of who is MedPAC, what are they? Because people are never really sure what their role or goals are, but they're a nonpartisan legislative branch of the agency. They provide recommendations. They have a report to Congress that includes those recommendations. There are 17 commissioners, and the MedPAC staff, which is a pretty small staff, they do conduct research and analysis, and then they present that to the commission for discussion. And then a report comes out from that to memorialize it. So if you wanted to do a quick Google on medpac.gov, you can see their webpage and all the things they offer there. But don't worry, there's a reference page at the end of the slide, and you can simply click later. So the recommendation in 2014 was pretty straightforward. They recommended to Congress to include the hospice benefit in Medicare Advantage plans starting in 2016. So I think we can all take a sigh of relief for right now, because 2016 has passed and MedPAC has not seen that implementation. Congress hasn't taken action there yet. And the rationale that MedPAC gave on this next slide is again referencing the financial responsibility and accountability for care for all the Medicare enrollees, and then to give that responsibility to plan for that full continuum of care, the full spectrum, which then would promote some integration, coordination. There might be some innovation there. So this is really just why they were making that recommendation. But I think what's interesting about that same report, which we often forget, is that MedPAC identified and heard from hospices a few key concerns. So hospices did express some concerns about MA plans forcing hospices not to provide the full spectrum of benefit, which is required by law. And MedPAC notes that if it was to be carved in, they must cover the full scope of the benefit as articulated in the statute. The next issue that they heard was concerns around spiritual services or volunteer, which is critical to hospice care. It's really a core tenet there, would be eliminated because an MA plan might not see the value in that. But MedPAC here also recognized that the conditions of participation, which you all are very well aware of that you must follow, does require those services to be provided. So MedPAC here does identify the conditions of participation, or COPs, would be applicable if it was carved in. And finally, the hospices expressed concern that beneficiary choice would not be honored. It would be limited to just in-network providers. That's a huge concern, especially with network adequacy or just patients choosing a hospice that just makes sense for them. And so here MedPAC identifies that, well, if it was to be part of an MA plans do allow for non-network providers, but those non-network providers would get the fee-for-service rate, which is another issue that I think hospices were very concerned about, is if the plans would, reduce the rate significantly. They're part of in-network. So I'd like to pause here and ask for another polling question of, do you agree with these 3 points that MedPAC has heard from hospices and how they responded? So I'll take a moment there. And while people are doing that, if you just want to do the chat box, and this one I emphasize is important for you to respond to, because we might be talking to MedPAC soon. So if you could talk to MedPAC directly, what would you ask MedPAC? So Lori, hopefully, people are excited to listen.
Yeah. While we're doing that, I hadn't got back to you yet on the state question.
Okay.
So I wanted to get back to you. It seems like authorization is a big concern in many states. And then some confusion between palliative care services and hospice for those providers that are contracting for both.
Oh, interesting.
That there's been confusion. Also just variation in the plans. And then, of course, the big one is delay in payment.
Yes.
And some saying as much as 9 months or greater for,
wow,
for payment. So
that makes it really tough.
yeah. There was a clarification. The Medicare fee-for-service rate, is that what's meant in the last bullet point? Someone asked for the FFS, that's
yes,
fee-for-service.
I am sorry about that. That is correct, fee-for-service rate. So your routine home care rate, continuous home care, general inpatient, inpatient respite rates, as you would know it today. Okay, so we're going to show the results. Looks like everyone's majority agreement of that. Others are not sure. That's okay. We're here to learn and work with each other. So some other key data trends that are interesting, I think, that have been cited is beneficiaries that were in Medicare Advantage the month prior to their hospice election. There's a few key points here that, pique the interest, I think, of policymakers, where the length of stay for those long lengths of stay are a little bit shorter. The live discharge rates are a little bit lower than compared to the fee-for-service population. The clinical conditions actually, pretty comparable to each other, whether fee-for-service or MA. And more Medicare Advantage enrollees are dying on hospice. And when we say that, what we mean is about 52% of MA enrollees are electing hospice. So that is increasing. In the next chart, this is just the growth of enrollment in Medicare Advantage plans. So you can see since 2005, it's steadily growing. Right now, well, now, not 2018, but in 2017, there's 33% of Medicare beneficiaries have Medicare Advantage. So it's quite a large population there. And then in this next slide, what we're really trying to illustrate here is in 2014, again, this is Kaiser Family Foundation as well, and so is the last chart. There were only 3 states that had greater than 40% enrollment in MA plans. And then when you look at the corresponding heat map, by 2017, 3 more states had joined that group. But overall, if you just focus on the colors, you can see that there's quite a bit of blue on the left-hand side, and then in a few short years, you can see that they're, increasing into the yellow and the orange. So I think that's, it's clear that Medicare Advantage enrollees are increasing over time. And if we think about the percent of hospice beneficiaries in MA, which is 1 month prior to their hospice election, there is a corresponding referral too. For those that are 50%, well, more than 40%, I would say, they also have high MA penetration. So what we know, and this is validated by your first answer, there's approximately 83% of hospices that are serving at least one Medicare beneficiary that have Medicare Advantage before their election. That's really interesting. So we're going to move to Congress and take a look at what Congress Congress says. So in 2015, the Senate Finance Committee released a report and essentially had the same recommendation to have hospice covered under Medicare Advantage plans. So I want to take a pause here and ask the question in the chat box. Sorry, Lori.
Gotta earn my keep.
So if you could ask Congress about the recommendation they made in this report, what would it be? If you can ask them anything. If they're sitting in front of you today, what would you ask them?
Be nice.
Because we do hope to have a conversation with those that participate in this work group to kind of get a sense of, what went behind this.
There has been a couple questions on some detail about the slides. One is, will the slides be available?
Absolutely, of course it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then on slide 11, you say that more MA patients are dying in hospice. Is that in comparison to patients that were fee-for-service prior to hospice?
That is correct. Thank you. So while people are filling that out, just a thought here where sometimes people ask, since I was from CMS, they say, well, why wouldn't CMS just do something about this? Can they do something? Can they just go ahead and carve this in? Or what is their authority? Well, CMS's authority, or the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services authority, is very limited in making it a full program. The statute limits that. However, the Innovation Center, which is part of CMS, does have the authority to design a model to test something like this if there was interest. So it's, again, very important for us to have this type of conversation. And to add to the last question, what would you ask Congress? I guess what I would ask too is, if CMS was to design a model or a demonstration, what safeguards would you ask for? Right? What specific safeguards, given the concerns we already heard?
Well, your chat box is lighting up.
Oh, so on the CMS part, but they don't want to talk to Congress.
A lot of concerns about authorization and patient choice is coming up a lot. And then the other, just understanding the pros and cons, and is this issue that we really need to solve?
Good question.
Yeah.
Has anybody thought about the safeguards coming in?
Let me look. Related to authorization, payment, and access, that one just came in. Authorization's getting a lot of conversation in here.
So I think for context, for those that are not aware, Medicare Advantage plans could require prior authorization for particular services. And when people are mentioning that, I think that's what they're pointing to, is that this will delay access to care for hospice beneficiaries, whether it's, crisis moment or something that needs potentially general inpatient care. If they had to go through prior authorization, it may delay that access.
Some suggestion of looking at the impact that MA Carvin has had on home care.
Oh.
And what we can learn from that. One did, I like this continuum of advanced illness that would integrate palliative care with a seamless transition to hospice.
So let's dive into that a little bit more. So what I think I'm hearing is, if hospice is carved into Medicare Advantage, what they'd also like to see is the complementary of having maybe the palliative care, serious illness care further upstream, such that there is the ability, right, to then provide services all the way through.
Zinnia, can I just add something? This is Ito.
Sure.
On that. One thing that we've definitely talked about, and that's worth considering, is that despite the talk about palliative care being an option for people who are enrolled in Medicare Advantage, and it is. It's also true that palliative care as a home-based interdisciplinary benefit is not a defined Medicare benefit. It doesn't exist. And so when Medicare Advantage plans are providing palliative care, it could be anything. One of the things that is worth considering in this conversation, as was just mentioned, is not just hospice, but also the creation of certain guardrails around what people get and who they can get it from when we're talking about palliative care. And while we still have some leverage, which is now before anything has been done on a government level, it is worth considering and putting together those two concepts, because it really is, from the patient's perspective, I need help and I don't really care what it's called. And I think it's incumbent upon us to figure out exactly how to really bridge the various levels of care that people currently get. If there's a advantage to being in Medicare Advantage, it is the ability to make some of those experiences more seamless. So we want to hold them to that.
Thank you. This is Lori. I'm thinking about the palliative care, the CMS Palliative Care Summit that was held yesterday, and some of the pearls that came out of Troy Field's presentation representing Blue Shield. And a couple of things that were interesting in that I hear a lot of in our chat, well, I don't hear, I see a lot in our chat about concerns about prior auth and co-pays. And there's ways that can be set up to eliminate those issues. And that was very evident in the way Blue Shield set up their palliative care benefit. So they made it a primary benefit, so there was no reason to have to jump through hoops with authorizations. There's no co-pays for that. And of course, a co-pay seems very counterintuitive to a hospice population, but also a seriously ill population. So there was a lot of little pieces. Those are just two specific examples of what they did to ensure some streamlining of access and timely access to those services. And then they are requiring some, I believe they're requiring actually accreditation for a palliative care to participate in their program. And that's their way of putting guardrails around palliative care. So that's another example. That's great. Yeah, now I'm going to go read the chat, so I can't be bothered anymore.
Okay. Okay. Well, Lori will jump back in if she sees things from the chat that we can answer. A couple of questions. What would you ask Congress? And the other is, what safeguards, if CMS were to develop a model, would you want to see in place? So let's move on to the next slide. There's a few things that are happening. Actually, in 2018, we saw some, I guess, tea leaves. And I think this is interesting just to point out, because of the changing healthcare environment, really, is that there has been very little change from the position of policy, its determination. And I think this year was really exciting because there's a couple of things that showed us that policymakers are opening their minds and thinking about supplemental benefits, not just in Medicare Advantage, but also even when thinking about an alternative payment model. So one of the first things that came out was the call letter for calendar year 2019, Medicare Advantage and Part D. This call letter actually is, if you think of it like a rule, a proposed rule, it's very similar process, but it's not through the Federal Register. In this particular year, they reinterpreted or made a new interpretation of what's considered primarily health related and really expanded that definition. So that's pretty exciting. This is really for MA plans. And then the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 also included language to expand the opportunity for supplemental benefits to be provided for chronically ill that goes beyond just the medical component. So that's something that's like, oh, that's really interesting. It's supposed to go into effect in 2020 and not to conflict with the call letter of 2019. And then another thing that will be coming out because of that law is the General Accountability Office, the Government Accountability Office, sorry, is going to release a report sometime in 2023 that just really provides some descriptive analysis about what supplemental benefits plans provided. So that will give us a little window into what is offered out there across the country. And I think more importantly for us is the physician-focused payment model technical advisory panel or committee. They also recommended to test a palliative care model with high importance. And actually, Lori spoke on NHPCO's behalf that how important this is and absolutely support having a model come out. So this is just to identify that kind of change in thinking around the important need for person-centered care that includes supplemental services. So we went through a couple of key players here. We talked about MedPAC and we talked about Congress. Well, what about us? So where do NHPCO members stand on the MA carve-in? It's really important. We have received feedback over, I feel like, a number of years. And more recently, in August, the Hospice Action Network released a legislative agenda survey. There are over 250 respondents. One of the questions on that survey was about whether you support or oppose the carve-in, 0 being in full opposition and all the way to the other end of the scale is full support. So we actually landed right there around 7. People are leaning towards support, but there were a lot of comments actually. So let's take a look at that. So be ready because there will be quite a few polling questions involved. A key theme, I think this goes along with what Lori was talking about and what she's seeing in the chat function, is that beneficiary access is one of the key things that people are really concerned about, so that beneficiaries have that flexibility to go to a hospice of their choice without having any kind of financial penalty. And then another issue that we heard from our members is the integrity of the hospice benefit. That one of the big concerns is if an MA plan was now like overseeing that part of the services, if hospice is included, that full depth and breadth would not be there, and that the interdisciplinary team potentially could be dissolved or changed, or there's concern there. So our polling question is, after thinking about both beneficiary access, integrity of the hospice benefit, do you agree or disagree, or you're not too sure? You need more information? Wow. The reason why Lori said wow is because there's absolute consensus. So I'm not going to, give a spoiler alert. There was you can't do what I can say. I'm sure people know. Okay, so I think we could probably launch that. So yes, there's agreement there. There's a few that are just really not sure. We need more information. Okay, another couple of key pieces that we heard from our members is around quality oversight and accountability. Really, this is a focus around the medical director and the interdisciplinary team, which is core to the hospice mission and philosophy. That if an MA plan wants to be part of, or hospice part of the MA plan, or vice versa, that the hospice medical director's role would not be respected, or even the interdisciplinary team. The other issue we heard a lot about is the administrative burden. For those larger providers that cover multiple states, they are concerned here that they would have to negotiate multiple contracts across the country, and it would be nice to have a standardized contract between a hospice and an MA plan. So again, we're gonna put out there in the polls if you agree, disagree, or you're not sure.
I'll try not to spoil it.
I'll do it for you. And again, please feel free to use the chat box if you want to elaborate on some of these issues. I'm really excited that it's lighting up, as Lori's indicating. You guys are giving me a lot of weekend reading. I appreciate that. Okay, we can launch the results. Again, a lot of agreement here on these issues.
There was in the chat, maybe your poll should have a strongly agree about consistent contracting. There's been a lot of chatter in here about contract issues. Some of it is the fact that you have different requirements per contract. Some of it is that those contractors or those payers only contract with a select number of hospices and then close their network. So a lot of concern about that.
Great. Okay, so those last 4 topics are actually things that we've heard over the years. I think many of our members, as seen in the poll here, absolutely agree. From the legislative survey, we found a couple more issues that we hadn't heard as much about. Supporting those small hospices, and that's exactly what you were talking about, Lori, is that private plans are not contracting with the small or new providers even, and it would get worse if hospice is carved into Medicare Advantage. So there is concern this time really around the small providers and those new providers. They have some concerns around that. But it sounds like what you're saying is even those that have been around or are larger have the same concern. And finally, the need for more information. So remember, we were saying that the results were right around 7. So people are leaning towards support. Some of those are leaning towards support with reservation. So needing more information because they can kind of see both sides here, where there is a huge potential to be detrimental and a lot of unintended consequences. And then the positive side of, yeah, there may be a more seamless care transition, but they're not sure. There's just not enough information there. So would love to hear on these 2 newer responses and themes that we heard from the legislative agenda. Our mouse is working. We're having a little mouse issue. All right, here we go. If I had to give a play-by-play, I would say the disagree and need more information are battling it out right now.
JR just sat up very eagerly in his chair.
Kind of like neck to neck, but it's definitely changing.
In the chat, administrative burden's been brought up a few times, and I know that was another question we posed yesterday during the Palliative Care Summit, and there was recognition that for some agencies, they have to hire different teams for different payers because of the administrative burden and the different hoops they have to jump through on the palliative care side. So again, we have a defined benefit with more guardrails than a palliative care program, but that seems to be a real concern.
Okay, thank you. So there's quite a consensus here as well. In agreement that these are also issues that are important. So I did anticipate that this would happen, that get topped out on all of these. So for this particular question, if you had to choose the top 3 issues that you're most concerned about, I'd love to see what rises to the top for you. It is fun to see. It's almost like a race somehow. We're going to give this a little bit more time because I think quite a few people it hasn't settled down quite yet. An amazing response here. Okay, I'll post the results. The integrity of the hospice benefit is primary there, and then followed by beneficiary access. And then, yes, the administrative burden rises right up there to the top. So I really appreciate that, to really kind of hone in on your top three. It kind of prioritizes things, doesn't it?
A lot of people are surprised at the mean being at the 7 compared to prior surveys.
Yes, I think that was the most surprising for me too. And then once I started reading the comments, I think what jumped out at me was people are leaning towards that because either they recognize that there is a change and something that we should be active in thinking about, or that they're hopeful as long as there's more information. So it's not a flat out no, but they're hopeful as long as, there's more conversation or the information that could be brought forth. And they can kind of see it happening potentially around them.
And do we know how that question was worded, Zinnia, on that survey by chance, or we can get back to the group of
I can get back to you.
It was that open-ended in the chat a little bit too, and was it worded in a different way than it had been previously, and does that make a difference? I don't know, but.
Okay. And the wording of that question.
All right. Thank you.
So we're doing pretty great on time, but there is a little surprise at the end, so hang in there. With the references, everything that's in these slides are really pulled from these references. Kaiser's, the maps and the trend of MA enrollment, the MedPAC reports that are most important to kind of like review if you have time. And then of course the full work group report from Senate Finance Committee of 2015. If you want to read the full conversation, it's maybe about a page long. So it looks daunting because it's hundreds of pages, but look for hospice and you'll dive right into it. The next set of references here is the Health Affairs article that was released this year. Really interesting to go through that because there's quite a few references and also just the complexity of this issue. And in 2014 in JAMA, there was an article also published thinking about this. Should it be included? And for reference around PTAC and their response to the serious illness models, provided that there. And if I were Judy, and I know Judy's probably listening, Judy Lemperson, the VP of Regulatory and Compliance, I'm putting my Judy hat on, and she would say, if you haven't looked at the CMS Hospice public use file, you should, because there are 2 files there, and there's about 3 years of data. One file is by state, and more importantly, as an individual provider, you can find yourself under the provider file and look up, what is CMS seeing about you as far as the demographics of your patient population, whether you are providing services to beneficiaries with Medicare Advantage, enrollee prior to hospice. There's so much great information. So just poke around or look for your provider number, and I think it'd just be really interesting. Then, of course, for a shameless plug, Our own podcast. Thank you, Vito, for doing that. It was great, and Lori. We also have a blog that has a couple, if you just want something quick and fast and the 3 key pieces of information you need to review to kind of stay on top of things, that's really the, it's short and sweet. Of course, email us, right, Catherine?
Right.
We man this email box at innovation@nhpco.org. And there's also a page, the MA and Hospice webpage, where this recording will be saved, and also the slides. And I think I will have to answer that question exactly about, I'll put it into the slides, how the question was worded for the responses. And finally, just for reflection, I want to really thank everybody for being engaged today. With the polling and the chat, I'm really excited, Lori. Your eyes keep lighting up, so it's making me very curious to review that. And also, we have a couple of last minute chat questions for you to just really reflect on. Like, what are your priority concerns, which we did kind of tap on, but if you want to expand on that and you didn't feel like you had enough time during the town hall, it'd be great to take some time to do that. And then, and also, what are the areas of greatest opportunity that you see? I think it's important to see both sides right now and see what we can bring forward. So I want to thank you again, and we look forward to hearing from you, whether it's by email or at our conference coming up in IDC. Love to, you haven't met me, it'd be great. Just come on over and introduce yourself, and we'll keep you up to date on the convening and the developments of that.
Is there going to be a report after the convening that might be accessible to our members?
Yes, so the expectation is after the convening, we will release the report early in 2019. I think that would give us enough time. Well, it is the holiday, so kind of compressed in time there, but we'll have time to summarize what the report, what the convening conversation will capture, and also, the intent of the meeting.
Great. You're still getting a lot of chat here, and one person did ask if the chat comments will be available to members. So we need to think about that. I think we could do that. Yes?
I think we can do that, and we might want to think about summarizing it so it's not a free feed. It's hard to follow.
We could group.
Yeah, we could do a frequently asked questions, sort of some common themes and answers in there.
I will say that reimbursement concerns came up multiple times here too, and they didn't feel like that was listed as one of the priorities or concerns. So.
Great. I don't know if Ido is still on, if he has any closing remarks.
Yeah, I would just like to thank everybody for calling in, for coming into this with an open mind, and for being active members and participants. That's how we all get the most out of this. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. The chat box will be open until the top of the hour. Thanks.